very much for the introduction, and thank you as well for inviting me here to speak to you today. It's kind of a unique conference. I don't think I've ever been to a conference organized by students for students before, so I'm really excited to perhaps sit in on some of the sessions and see how things turn out. I thought maybe that I would start with a brief introduction of who I am. My name is Khoi Trinh. I work for Smart Technologies. I am the manager for education policy for the Americas. So basically, what does that mean? It means that I work with ministries of education in order to help them understand the importance of ICT, information communications technologies, and how that affects students both today and in the future. So that's a little bit about me. I won't belabor all of this stuff. I used to be a teacher as well. I taught secondary mathematics and physics. And from there I moved into private industry. I worked with several publishers before coming to Smart Technologies, and that's been about 6 years ago. I'm actually based in Toronto, which is about 6 hours straight north of Bogota. So that's Canada, in case you're not so good with geography. So when I learned about 2 weeks ago that I was coming to Colombia, I thought, I should probably brush up on my Spanish, because I don't know very much Spanish. I speak French, I speak English, obviously, and I speak Vietnamese as well. So I went out and I bought this Rosetta Stone software. And so I've been taking lessons online for about 2 weeks now. And I've learned some really helpful phrases like el niño bebe leche, and other things like la mujer come arroz. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting, but when am I ever going to use that? So I apologize in advance for my use of English today, but my Spanish is horrible, and you wouldn't want me to do this in Spanish anyways. The topic for today, Luis, my colleague, told me that I should talk about 21st century learning. And he told me I had about 45 minutes. Apparently that's not true. I have about 25 minutes, so I'm going to cut this whole thing down, and I'm going to try to squeeze it into 25 minutes. So excuse me if I'm talking really fast, but I'm free to answer any questions you may have later. So about 21st century learning, I thought, where should I start with this idea of 21st century learning? So what I thought I would do is I thought I would talk to you about 3 people that have sort of influenced my thinking about 21st century learning. The first person is this guy here. His name is Thomas L. Friedman. He wrote a book called The World is Flat. Really super interesting book. If you have 6 months, I would recommend that you read it because it's like 600 pages long. This one is a little bit shorter. This was written by a fellow by the name of Daniel Pink. And this one is only about 200 pages long, but it's an excellent, excellent book that talks about what education is like in the 21st century. The third person that sort of has influenced my thinking about 21st century learning is this guy here. His name is Sir Ken Robinson. And he's received, he's a knight, obviously. He's been knighted by the Queen of England for his work in education. So where does this all begin? Well, the story by Daniel Pink, his book, begins with this machine here. It's called the Functional Magnetic Resonance Imaging Machine. What does it do? Actually, if you've never seen one before, you basically lie here, and this machine pushes you into here, and it takes pictures of your brain. So the pictures come out, and they sort of look like this. They can tell which part of your brain is active at any given time when you're thinking about anything, when you're looking at things. Okay? And they've done a lot of experiments. One of them that I kind of liked was this monk. So he's a monk, and he was in pain, and they stuck him into this machine, and while he was at rest and in pain, you could see right here the part of the brain that was active. When he started to meditate, a different part of his brain became active, and in fact, less of his brain was active. So they think that a lot of things that ail humans can be cured through meditation, and obviously this is part of that research. At any rate, this fellow Daniel Pink stuck himself into this machine to see how his brain would work. And in this machine, they showed him pictures like this and then recorded what his brain was doing at the time. And as it turns out, most of your teachers probably already know this. You may be aware of this, but your headmistress was speaking about left brain versus right brain this morning. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain what that's all about. The left side of the brain actually controls the right side of your body. So when you raise your right hand, it's actually the left side of your brain that is doing that. The right side of your brain obviously controls the other side of your body. How do we know this? Well, a lot of patients who have been in accidents where there's damage to one side of the brain or the other, they often can't control the other side of their body. So that's the first thing you need to know about your brain. The second thing you need to know about your brain is the left side of your brain is very good at sequential processing. That's one thing after another. Okay? The right side of your brain is responsible for something called simultaneous processing. Okay? So, in other words, this side of your brain does things one after the other. This one is the multitasking side of your brain. Okay? So the right side is responsible for multitasking. The left side of your brain specializes in text. The right side of your brain specializes in context. So let me give you an example of what that means. If somebody were to say, I'm going to the store to buy milk now, and slams the door, okay? If he says, I'm going to the store to buy milk now, slams the door, okay? If you have damage to the right side of your brain, you don't understand the context. All you understand is the person is going to the store to buy milk. You don't understand that the person is, in fact, angry and going to the store to buy milk. Okay? The final thing you need to know about your brain is that the left side analyzes detail while the right side synthesizes the big picture. Okay? So the left side looks at little pieces of a picture, for instance, and the right side of the brain takes the entire picture into consideration. If you take all of this and put it into sort of a chart like this, the left side of your brain sort of does this stuff. Okay? The right side of your brain is responsible for this stuff. And whether you know it or not, our academic system currently is geared towards the left side of the brain. You know, a lot of people appreciate these qualities in a brain. Okay? And whether you know it or not, as your headmistress alluded to this morning, what we need to encourage is more right brain thinking. A classic example of this in the US, when you go to school, in university, lots of people like to go for their MBA, which is the Masters of Business Administration. This is what gets you the big dollars in US economy once you leave the school. But it's predicted in the future that the MBA will be replaced by what's called the MFA. The MFA is the Master of Fine Arts. In fact, it's found these skills, these right brain thinkers, are very good at art. Okay? And to explain to you why they think that the MFA, the Master of Fine Arts, will be the MBA of the future, we have to go back to this Thomas Friedman guy. Okay? The world is flat. And he talks about 3 factors which will gradually shift us from left brain towards right brain. He calls them abundance, Asia, and automation, the 3 A's. Okay? And I'm going to take a few seconds to explain to you exactly what that means. We have always been a society that has been based on scarcity. We've never had quite enough of everything, right? We've always had to hunt for what we need. Today, for the very first time, we have this notion of abundance. We have more than enough to sustain our population, okay? A classic example or a good example would be these toilet brushes, okay? There's so many different kinds of toilet brushes out there. You know, you can get colorful ones, you can get duck ones, you can get polka dot ones. What is it that sets this apart from this, apart from this, apart from this? Well, it's an emotional factor. It's beauty, right? I would choose this one because it appeals to me. In a society of abundance, where there's lots of stuff, lots of cars, lots of computers, the thing that sets one car apart from the other is how beautiful it looks, okay? Or what emotional response a customer gets when they look at the car. And that's what we need to develop in you. That's what our teachers need to develop in you in order for you to be successful in the 21st century. The second one is Asia. So what is this idea of Asia? Well, I'm sure you've all heard it all before. Lots of our manufacturing jobs, our high-paid skilled worker jobs, are moving overseas. And why is that the case? Well, if you think about it, it's a simple case of economics. A chip designer in the US would make approximately $7,000, okay? In India, that same chip designer, probably 1,000. Computer programmers in North America, they're at probably $6,000 a month, okay? The same person in Russia is making $650 a month. An accountant in North America would be making approximately $5,000 a month. In the Philippines, the exact same person would be making $300 a month, okay? So clearly, jobs that have sort of a logical, sequential, analytic nature to them are moving overseas because they can do it at lower costs. So what we have to ask ourselves in order to be competitive in a global economy and in order to be successful in the 21st century, what do we have to do to get the jobs? Okay? Well, we have to do the things that these people can't do. Okay? So what are those things? And I'll answer those questions in a second. The final thing is automation. So this is a fellow by the name of John Henry. You may or may not have heard of him. He's part of American folklore. The story goes like this. In the late 1900s, they were building railroads across America to connect all of the country. And this fellow, John Henry, was laying the tracks down, okay, with a hammer. And then one day, the company bought a machine. The machine could lay down the tracks a lot faster than a human could. So all of these people were about to lose their jobs. So John Henry, what he did was he challenged the owner of the company to a competition. He said, if I can lay down track faster than your machine, you need to keep all of these workers. And so they did the competition, and in fact, he won. The only problem is, you know, as the story goes, at the end, he died. So he was so fast, and he did his job, he died. And that sort of highlights this issue of automation. Things are moving towards an automated sort of system where things that are repeated, that can be broken down into smaller steps and repeated, those jobs are being replaced by machines. And probably a classic example, you guys are probably too young to know this, but this is Garry Kasparov, and this is a machine actually called Deep Blue. It was developed by IBM, and in 1996, it was the first time a machine had ever beaten a human at a game of chess. Okay? And that highlighted the problem. Things that you could program, these jobs will in the future be taken by computers. So how do we remain competitive? What do we have to do as humans in order to beat these computers, right? So how do we keep our jobs in the face of this automation? And this isn't the first time that this sort of revolution has happened, right? It happens all the time. In the early 19th century, we were farmers, right? That was called the agricultural age. And when the agricultural age developed the steam engine, all of a sudden these machines were taking the jobs of these farmers. So what did the farmers do? Well, they reinvented themselves and they moved into the cities from the rural areas and they became factory workers. And then the factory workers, eventually, these people had a revolution as well, and computers came along. And computers sort of took the place of these factory workers, and then you had what's called the knowledge economy. So the knowledge economy came along, and that's the 21st century, right? So if you think about it, what is the next logical step? What is sort of the era that you will grow up in? Well, the answer happens to be the conceptual age. So the 19th century was about the agricultural age. The 18th century. The 19th century is about the industrial age. The 20th century is about the information age. And the 21st century will be about the conceptual age. What does that actually mean? Well, let me summarize what I just said, okay? So in the face of abundance, where we have enough material to satisfy the needs of millions, how do we fight against that? What skills do you need to be successful in the 21st century? You need to be creative people, and you need to understand emotions, how to appeal to people on an emotional level. This is what we call intrapersonal skills, okay? Not interpersonal, intrapersonal, relating to other people. Asia. So when Asia is taking all these logical, sequential, analytical jobs and doing them at lower cost, how do you compete against that? Well, you compete by learning how to synthesize things, not breaking things into small pieces, but taking small pieces and putting them together and then seeing the big picture. Okay? That's what we need for the 21st century. And finally, when computers and machines are taking your jobs, things that are repeatable and that can be broken down into small steps, how do you fight against that? What skills do you need to develop? Well, in fact, you need to develop, again, interpersonal skills. Computers can do a lot of things, but they can't relate to other people like human beings can, okay? So these are some of the skills that you're going to need for the 21st century. If you take a look at all of these skills, which side of the brain does this? That's the right side of the brain, okay? And when I read that book about Daniel Pink, about the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, if you'll remember, the title of the book is actually called A Whole New Mind. And I thought what he was saying is we need to get rid of the left side of the brain and we need to develop the right side of the brain. In fact, the key to understanding his whole philosophy is this word in the middle. A whole brain. Okay? So we're not just talking about the right side of the brain. We're not talking about the left side of the brain. We're saying that in order for you to be successful in the 21st century, you need a functioning left side of the brain, so logical, sequential, analytic, mathematical, so on and so forth. But we also need you to develop the right side of the brain. In other words, we need you to have a whole brain. And that's what will give you success in the 21st century. I have a whole bunch of other slides. I'm not too sure how much time is left. Does anyone know about 10 minutes? Okay. Well, I'll just go through a few examples then. I forgot to talk about this fellow by the name of Ken Robinson. A very interesting fellow. And I'm gonna just play this short video clip to sort of express to you what Ken Robinson's thinking is on 21st century teaching and learning.
That's what I mean by changing the paradigm. There was a great study on recently of divergent thinking. Published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a synonym, but it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, I mean, there are tests for this. I mean, one kind of common example would be people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? Or those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be trimmed a foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? You know, like, does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? You know. Now they tested this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay? So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what's your name? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, ages 8 to 10. What's your name? 50. They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? Now, this tells an interesting story, because you could have imagined it going the other way, couldn't you? You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is we all have this capacity, and two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up. A lot. But one of the most important things, and I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated. They know they've spent 10 years at school being told there's one answer, it's at the back. And don't look. And don't copy, because that's cheating. I mean, outside schools, that's called collaboration. No, but inside schools. And this isn't because teachers want it this way.
Interesting point of view from Sir Ken Robinson. I thought I'd share this video with you. I think it's not working. Oh, yes, it is. And I thought maybe, you know, we have to really, and I'm speaking to teachers at the moment, we have to really ask ourselves, are we speaking the same language as our students? This is a commercial that aired in U.S. television. It's a TV commercial. Anyways, I'll play it for you. It's funny. Oops.
Brother, so do you. Your cell phone bill is what's up. All this texting.
OMG, I'm busy.
It is a big deal. Who are you texting 50 times a day?
IDK, my BFF Jill.
Tell your BFF Jill that I'm taking away your phone.
Me paying this bill, that's what's damn it.
Now, too much texting is NBD. Singular brings you...
So WU, what does that mean? Yeah, what's up? OMG? Yeah, okay. Oh my God or oh my gosh. INBD? How many of the teachers know what INBD means? It's no big deal. IDK? I don't know. TIS and F. Yeah. That is so not fair. So it appears, they talk a lot about this idea of digital immigrants versus digital natives. And it does appear that we are speaking different languages, right? The way that teachers like to teach, they like a slow, controlled release of information. On the other hand, the way that today's 21st century learner likes to learn, they like to learn receiving information quickly and from multiple sources. Would you all agree with that? Traditional teachers like singular processing. Digital learners like parallel processing. So it's multitasking. If you look at students who do homework today, they don't just do homework. They do homework while talking on the phone, while texting to their friend, while watching TV and listening to the radio, something like that. Unfortunately, traditional teaching isn't geared towards that style. Teachers like to provide text before pictures, sounds, and videos. And I'm not saying this about all teachers. But digital learners actually like to look at the pictures first. So when I'm on Facebook, I never look at the text. The first thing I go and I scan the whole news feed and I look for pictures. And that's how I learn best. Traditional teachers like to provide linearly logical and sequential information. Yeah, you know what? Digital learners don't really work that way. They jump around all the time. And a great example of this is if you've ever watched a student do research on any given topic. They just go to Google And they're all over the place on Google, trying to get as much information as they can, and then they put it all into one big picture later. Traditional teachers like students who work independently, and as Ken Robinson mentioned earlier, when you work together, that's sort of called collaboration, right? Digital learners are all about networking simultaneously with many others. Deferred gratification. So these are some of the things that traditional teachers like, and these are the ways that digital learners sort of learn. And our 19th century classroom was very much geared towards traditional teaching. One teacher at the front of the classroom talking to a whole bunch of students. Fast forward 100 years to the 20th century, and it's like almost nothing has changed, right? You have a teacher at the front of the classroom talking to students. Fast forward to the 21st century, and in a lot of classrooms, I'm not saying this is all classrooms, obviously my classroom wasn't like this, but you have a lot of technology. But still the same teaching, right? Still the same methodology. And the thought here is that just putting technology into a classroom will solve all of your problems. But in fact, that's not true. That's not how we prepare students for the 21st century. This is a study by Ramble in 2006 performed in the UK, and it said benefiting from ICT's potential does not come from just plugging in a computer and continuing with the same teaching style. In fact, it's been shown that when teachers adopt technology, what they'll do is they'll do old things in old ways, and then they'll move on to old things in new ways, and then finally, in a final step, they'll start doing new things in new ways. And that's sort of what I wanted to show you. Maybe I'll skip these examples because there's not a lot of time. This is Markham College in Lima, Peru. Probably one of the best examples anywhere in the world that I've ever seen of collaboration, of collaborative learning. You'll see here that this picture, there are no teachers in this picture, right? It's all kids. The kids are working at the board. The kids are using the technology. The other thing that you'll notice is they're in small groups. This is what we call collaborative small group learning, right? And we think that this is how the real life works. I don't work in a team of 30 people. I work in a small team of like 7 people. Okay? And you can't really see it, but each of these kids has a little board. And this little board, while this student is up at the board doing work, these students are actually working on their individual writing surfaces. This is what the school actually looks like, so I took a video.
Everybody ready?
Whoops. They're all working on fractions, actually. But some of them are doing it at the board. Some of them are doing it by counting beans. Some of them are doing it by pouring water in and out of cups. Some of them are doing it by playing with cards. Okay. And at any given time, the teacher is sort of walking around from group to group to group. How do I stop this? So I wanted to give you a sort of a sense of what teaching and learning might look like in the 21st century. Even for me, whoops, let me just make this full screen. I had a difficult time of this as well, moving into the 21st century model of teaching. But eventually I came up with my own philosophy, and this is my own quote. So I'm not quoting anybody else. Feel free to quote me if you like. Yesterday's generation was a generation of digital consumers. Today's generation is a generation of digital creators. In the past, that's how it had to be. We didn't have as... Oh, come on. I know you can do it. There we go. Even in the past, we didn't have the tools that we needed to create stuff. So when I was a student, if I wanted to create a video, I couldn't do it because I didn't have the tools to do it. Well, that's sort of not the case today, right? Students have the tools. They're very powerful tools, but not only do they have the tools, they know how to use them. So this is created by, I think it's a grade 2 or grade 3 class. in Finland. And they've just put together a video using screen capture technology. An example of how I used it in my classroom, so as I said, I used to teach science, and I used to teach, this is called, what is this called? Mitosis, actually, but close. And I used to teach it in a very specific way. I used to teach it with a whole bunch of pictures. I would ask my students to look at the pictures, memorize the pictures, and then regurgitate that information to me. And then one day I thought, you know, maybe I should try and do this differently. I've got 2 minutes. So this is how I used to teach, and then one day I said, oh, let's try something different. So I came up with this idea of a mitosis animation, and I said, why don't you create, as students in small groups, an animation of what mitosis actually looks like. So what they did was they used the interactive whiteboard, the smartboard actually, and they created these little chromosomes that you could actually move around slightly, right? And all they did was they moved from slide to slide to slide. And as you move from slide to slide to slide, you can sort of see the chromosomes move. And there's a really neat little feature in this piece of software that allows you to capture everything that happens on the smartboard. So what they would do is they would just record this as they were going through the slides, and up presto comes your little mitosis animation. And this obviously is the idea behind freeze frame animation. So I think that's sort of a couple of examples that I've shared with you. I'm going to leave you with sort of the following thoughts. So I'll just sort of skip all the way to the end, if I may. I've talked a lot about, oops, that's not the end. There it is. How your teachers can teach differently. But this is a student conference, so I would be remiss if I didn't speak about your role as students in the 21st century classroom. So what role do you play in the 21st century classroom? And I don't spend a lot of time talking about it because I think you already know what it is. And based on the introduction today, I'm thinking that probably a lot of you already do this. But if we're going to move to a 21st century model of learning where the teacher is not what we call the sage on the stage, but a guide on the side, we really need you as students to take more ownership over your education, more responsibility for your own education, and be more accountable for your education. So that's it for me. If you'd like more information about any of this stuff, you can, of course, go to our website, which is smarttech.com or exchange.smarttech.com. I'd like to thank you all for your attention this morning. I know it was kind of long, but I wish you all the best of luck today and in the future.